Good morning. I woke up this morning to discover that my old colonel had died, His Royal Highness Prince Philip. He was Colonel in Chief of the Seaforth Highlanders for almost my entire life. And I just, at 99 and not having outlived any of his kids, and having generally the positive acclaim of everybody who served with him and knew him, I think he won the lottery. But at the same time, I'm a bit gutted because I met him several times, and he was a remarkable person, which you can read about elsewhere. But I want to share a couple of my own stories. I I, I think he came out in 1985 for some event, and I commanded the 100-man honor guard of my regiment, the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada. And I'm standing out there in full dress with my broadsword. Not this one. This is an issue one. My broadsword was a family heirloom, which a great uncle must have been considerably taller than me, because the sword was about a good 5, maybe as much as 8 inches. It felt like that, longer than your standard broadsword. So there am I standing on parade, just as pleased as punch, because hey, local boy makes good. Because to be quite frankly, when I tell you that I come from humble origins, that's the understatement of the century. Yet here I am, commanding a guard in wonderful uniform, about to, salute royalty. Well, the thing was, given a combination of my enthusiasm and adrenaline and frankly nerves, plus the fact that the sword was a little bit longer than issue, when I did the salute, which of course the full salute is you bring the hilt up to your lips, which I guess is kissing the cross, but also in an older symbolism is saluting fortune, because it represents randomness, chaos, and such. You bring the sword up to your low ceiling here, bring the sword up to the lips, and then sweep the sword down to a position where you can't defend yourself with it, and then back up again. Well, again, with a combination of nerves and everything else, when I brought my sword out, now I have to lean back so I can do this sweep, can't do it. I near as damn it took his face off. And I didn't notice it at the time, but I thought, oh my God, I must be about to faint, because I swear his image just wavered there, right? So I started breathing and wiggling my toes and stuff, and then carried on with the inspection. And then at the end of it, when he went away, dismissed the guard, and we go marching away, and still feeling pretty bloody pleased with myself. And the guard sergeant, whose name I won't mention because he's probably going to see this, comes power marching up beside me and with a stick under his arm says, "Sir, do you ever watch the news, sir?" And I went, "Oh, not really. Why? You might want to watch the news tonight, sir." And he wheels back to his position, and I'm like, what the hell was that about? So fine, get back and watch the news that night. And there he is, marching out, and the band's playing. And then all of a sudden, he does a very respectable limbo drop as this glittering arc of steel carves its way through the space he'd just been in. And I saw this, and I swear I was making noises that perhaps only dogs could hear. I was like, seriously thought about putting myself in a box and posting myself somewhere, just ghastly. So, and people gave me a stick about that for a long time. And maybe 4.5, 5 years later, the colonel calls me into his office, and he said, this was September of whatever year, 90, 91, something like that. And he says, yeah, Prince Philip's coming for lunch on March the 21st. You're it. Come back in a month, 2 weeks, and tell me what your plan is. And I walked out of there going, oh. But this is the great thing about the Army, is you get, as an Army, and as an infantry officer, you become the most supreme generalist ever, because you never know what project's going to be thrown your way. So I go away, I make my plan, I come back, I give it. Now, the officers' mess is 3 floors up at Seaforth Armory. So I had planned this as possibly more than I'd ever planned anything. I had my father, who's about the same age as his late highness, I would time him how long it took him to get up the damn stairs. I had a fellow posted on one of the landings, a soldier posted on one of the landings in coveralls with a mop and bucket, looking like he was on extras, cleaning detail. And so I'm up in the mess. So when the royal party went past, his job was to ram the bucket into the wall. I would hear the crash down the stairs and know that I had 4.5 seconds, right? So I'm up on the mess, and it seems that half of Parliament was there. The Speaker was there. a couple of senators, Minister of Defense, a few others, and which was fine because they know protocol. But their wives had turned up unannounced, and they, or at least some of them it seemed, had decided that they cloaked themselves in their husband's dignity, to quote somebody, and they weren't going to be pushed around by a young whippersnapper of a captain, right? So I'm just, it was literally like herding cats, trying to get these people in the right spot for the walkthrough, the royal progression. And then, and I hear this clatter in the stairs, and I'm like, oh Christ, sir, there, stay, sir, don't move, good, out to the door. And I come to the door, and I'm like, oh, okay, just settle myself down. Bring myself up. You don't stand to attention. You don't do drill in the mess. But I brought myself up, brought myself erect as he came to the door, and I greeted him and welcomed him to the mess. Now it's been 4 or 5 years, and I've been promoted, and I'm in a different order of dress. But still, he looks me in the eye for what seemed like an eternity, and then very pointedly looked to see if I was armed. Did I have a sword? And I swear, I near as damn it fell down at his feet at that moment. If it hadn't been for the twinkle in his eye, I probably would have thrown myself out the window at that moment, right? But he, later on, he joked about it a bit, and I was like, oh, thank God. But yeah, he was a great old gentleman. He very discreetly, very kindly supported me. It gave moral support. There's no tangible benefit or anything, but when I was later on after retirement, when I was the museum curator and I was researching and writing stories for the Regimental Journal and elsewhere, he made it known that he was enjoying my articles and he was reading them, and he gave a bit of encouragement. Have young MacDonald contact Fort George, sort of thing. It was nice. It was very warming. But I think one of the funniest stories about him. Well, 2 other stories. One that I'd heard from a sergeant when I was a recruit is the title that he came up in conversation. And the sergeant had been a cowboy in the 50s, because this is in the early 1970s when I heard this story. The sergeant had been a cowboy, a ranch hand, up at one of the ranches in the interior. And the royal family, or Her Majesty, does or did own a rather large ranch up there. And he was working on it. So they had one evening where the royal couple was sitting at a campfire, and everything's jolly and such. And then Her Majesty gave sign that she wished to retire for the evening. So Prince Philip goes off with her, but he says, "Don't you guys move." Words to that effect. And then after about an hour or so, he came back with a case of whiskey and sat down and says, "Right, lads." And they had rather a time of it. But I think the funniest story, and this is going to possibly court some controversy amongst people who hear it, but he thought it was hilarious. The last time he visited the regiment and inspected a guard, I forget what I was doing at the time. I wasn't on the parade square, but I heard the story from the two fellows who were involved. That the guard is on parade, and one of my soldiers, and I won't mention his name because he's gone on to do very well indeed, and the opinions of the unthinking would cause him some embarrassment. But he's standing on parade as a soldier, and his mate, his front rank man, is standing in front of him, of course, and they're standing easy, waiting for the royal party to arrive, and my friend goes. The front man looks around, and I almost said his name. He just sort of went. I was like, what? Now, and somebody looks down and just about fell over himself, because on the service dress tunic, the DEU tunic of the Canadian Army, there's a command badge. Army, Navy, Air Force, Special Forces, Training Command, any of that stuff. And instead of the mobile command badge, which was a sort of a cross shape, he substituted a different cross shape. Now, before some of you predictably lose your tiny little minds, I would point out that this is the post-war issue that came out, I believe, in the 50s, so that the offending and offensive iconography has been removed. So it's not as offensive as it could be. It's the date of 1939 and the 3 oak leaves of the earlier Prussian issue. So he's wearing it on his tunic in place of the mobile command badge. And as I said, buddy's just went, oh, making noise like a cat, just, oh. And then the car arrives, and there's nothing you can do, right? Now, when I was listening to the story, I was like, oh, crumbs, right? Because Prince Philip had an eye for detail, a wonderful eye for detail. As an aside, I mean, he was phenomenal with names. And that guard that I mentioned, where I nearly took his face off, he was walking off the parade square, walking off the field, and he saw a fellow in the crowd, and he identified him instantly by rank and the last time he'd seen him. Sergeant so-and-so, yes, you were in the second color party, escort to the colors, 1962 at UBC. Yeah, it's good to see you. How are you? And you can't do that with research. This was a random guy in the crowd. But he had a real eye for uniforms and detail and such like that. So buddy's thinking, oh my God, international incident. Oh. So Prince Philip walks up and he's walking along the ranks. And he gets about a pace past my friend and then stops and then swivels. And those in the know were just like, and I wonder what my friend was thinking at this time, because things very definitely just got real, right? Turns back, but he'd spotted an unfamiliar ribbon. My friend had served on a rather, I don't want to say limited, but let's call it a rare ribbon. And he'd been on a UN observation force in a part of the world I won't name because that would be giving away details there. And so Prince Philip had never seen that particular UN ribbon before, and he asked about that. Now, I think my friend at this point is probably surreptitiously turning a bit, so his gaze, so that the Iron Cross has vanished over the horizon, so to speak. But he missed it. Possibly in the only time in his life, he missed a fault in a uniform. And off he goes. And I heard this story because nothing spreads faster than rumor. Light ain't in it. And I heard this story when I was up in the mess, and I was like, oh my God, right? So later on, when Prince Philip toured the messes, I tagged along. I was sort of semi-invited to tag along because I was PMC. And when we went into the mess, and he came straight up to my friend and said, oh yeah, so, and chatted with him a few more minutes about that particular tour with the UN. And I said, well, you may have not seen something else, sir. And we pointed to it, and I thought Prince Philip was going to cough up a tooth. He was laughing so hard. He loved it. He'd been pranked, and they'd gotten away with it. And he thought that was extraordinarily funny. So if I had to toast him, I'll toast you in coffee, sir, because it's before lunch. But yeah, sir, you'll be missed. In the words of, I think it was Hamlet, he was a man, Horatio, we shall not see his like again. So here's to you, sir. In the words of somebody else, I wish you no peace where you've gone, but I wish you great action and tumult, because that is what you deserved above all. Or sorry, that is what you loved above all. So here's to you, sir.